Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next recording of Azure Cloud Talk. I'm here, Alec Harrison, with our co-host Brian Gorman and our special guest Chris Thompson. He is the founder and principal at OptQuality. How's it going, Chris?
Good. How's everybody else doing? Glad to be here.
Yeah, not too bad. How about you, Brian?
Doing great, thanks.
Yeah. So, Chris, you want to give us a little rundown of maybe how you got into tech, what you're doing now, and maybe somewhere in between of how you got there?
Yeah. So interesting enough, I grew up on a small farm actually outside of Omaha. So I was a little farm boy growing up and then became a video game nerd growing up and was really big into that. So it got me more and more involved in the tech. And I went to school for computer engineering. That was my degree that I went for at University of Nebraska. And I was actually working at Cabela's as a part-time shoe salesman when I was in college, like as like a seasonal employee. And then by the time I left there, I was like their highest paid engineer, moving to be a senior enterprise architect by the time like I had left Cabela's, right before the
Wow.
Bass Pro acquisition. And so of course all the executives knew me because they like telling that story to everybody, right? Like this guy started as a seasonal
Yeah.
employee making minimum wage, and then now he's out here. They sent me to Hong Kong, they sent me all over Canada. They sent me across the U.S., like all these locations and stuff. So they love that story. Actually had development experience in college, but when I went into the workforce, I went into the infrastructure side of the house and not the development side. And the way I looked at it was I could go be an average developer, or none of these people over here at the time could do much scripting. Like they weren't very good at doing scripting or any of the automation side at the time. This is obviously a while ago. And PowerShell was starting to become slightly popular at that moment. And so I decided to go in the infrastructure space and kind of bring some development skills to that side and focus on automation and a lot of pieces in that area. And then I've been all over the block. So I did system engineering for like Windows, Linux. I did networking, route switch for Cisco. I did telephony and contact center for Cisco. I've done development, data analytics. I've fulfilled like Scrum Master roles, product owner roles. I did help desk for a little while. I've probably done nearly every side of IT at some point throughout my career at this point, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I've done BA, I've done QA, some of those extra like activities.
What's your favorite thing you've done? What's your favorite thing to do?
It's a great question. I like, I like, I would say I really like switching it up. So I don't like doing the same thing for extended periods of time. Like I kind of like change. So I've had different loves throughout my career. There was a period I really loved building automation for when I was in retail. My favorite thing I ever did, my accomplishment that I'm happiest about is they had SAP in all of Canada for their front end and for like all their point of sale and everything like that. And nobody at the time had ever automated SAP end to end ever. So like even Disney used SAP point of sale and everything. And I used SCCM with PowerShell and everything, and I fully automated it so I could re-image an entire point like retail store within by myself, physically walking around the store in less than an hour. And
Wow.
like end to end. And SAP actually flew to Toronto to come see it because that had not been done by any of their other major partners yet. And so they actually flew out to an overnight, like an after hours activity to come see it. So that was a
That's
love at one
cool.
point. And then I moved to, I would say my current love is I really like trying to flatten out orgs and empower teams to be self-sufficient without having bureaucracy and external dependency and stuff like that. So I'd say like my favorite thing right now is more on the process side of like, how do we empower teams to be able to go from idea to production, 90% of the time without having to have external dependencies? Like, what do we got to do to get rid of this bureaucracy to enable that to happen? And I think that's probably one of my bigger passions right now.
So you're talking more like a streamlining DevOps, getting people the permissions to do the things they need to do so they can literally put their code in and
Yep.
get it into production.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
cool.
So like an example, like there's people's jobs like that, they basically have to like check for security things on what's the top 10 security things on this new thing before I let it go to prod. Obviously, how do we just automate those, put those in pipelines, and then now you focus on taking these 10 things and making them 20, making them 30, making them 40, but you don't have to go look at this how do we get rid of all these things like cab meetings and, all these change process meetings and stuff? How do we break all that down so that way, to your point, we can get that stuff so they can check in code and go to prod as quickly as they want.
That's awesome. Any problems with things like the old Sarbanes-Oxley or anything with that? Or do you work around that, or how would that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in some highly regulated companies, like whether it's HIPAA or PCI and some other ones. I think sometimes it's based on like how you interpret some of the requirements from like an audit perspective. So like separation of duties, like a lot of people have always focused on, okay, a different tech team has to do this and this one has to do this. But like you can sometimes, like depending on your auditor, I guess, but like you can fulfill those requirements to being like a product owner is the one that approves the deployment to go to prod. But that's still on the team, but they're a different role and they're not the same people that committed. So usually I can get around those things. We just got to figure out like the right way to do it.
Yeah, that's what I've always been under the impression that as long as the person who wrote the code isn't the one pushing it to production directly, that it goes through some checks and balances, you'd be all right. So that sounds pretty reasonable to me. But I'm interested because you're saying, you're eliminating what I would lovingly call red tape to get my stuff into production, and, ultimately saying, let's move faster. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, we still have the quote unquote red tape. We're just automating it so that way, we don't have to have a person as a gatekeeper. We just want to eliminate the dependencies on other people and the dependencies on other architecture.
So that leads me to question, is there an AI agent in the mix for this? Because that seems like a job for an AI agent.
There's not yet, but I've been using Copilot quite a bit, the different Copilots.
Okay.
And I haven't built any custom ones yet, but I foresee some of the Copilot agents fulfilling many roles in this process. To be completely honest, like a lot of the product owner prioritization efforts can be done with an agent. A lot of the Scrum Master activities of like managing the boards can be done with an agent. To your point, like a lot of the checks and balances checks could be enhanced or improved or done better with agents. Like those things are all going to be on the table, I think, in the very, very near future.
That's really cool. And just to be clear, you're not talking about eliminating the project manager's job the product owner's job, but you're basically going to free them up to do the real thing they love, which is talking to the business and getting the requirements and not having to do the tedium, I lovingly call it, of managing the board. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm already using Copilot to write acceptance criteria in Gherkin. So we already do that. So we use Copilot to basically, here's the title of our story, high level what we're trying to do, and then it just kicks out acceptance criteria and I ask for it in Gherkin format. And we just review it and then plop it in. And then obviously that goes through the test cases really easily.
That's nice.
And yeah, that doesn't get rid of somebody. It just, like you said, it makes it, nobody's having to type that tedious stuff out, trying to figure that out. Like it just simplifies that. And like you said, now they have more cycles to focus with the business.
Yeah.
So
it frees us up to do better work is what
exactly.
It really does.
100%.
Well, and I think even I bet this is a common theme. My first gig out of college, we had to do SOX compliance and stuff like that. And they did like quarterly audits, and your QA or whoever was leading the audit effort would basically put their head in a hole for a week, couple days at least, because, they'd be gathering all the requirements, all the stuff they needed for the audit. I even remember one specific thing this company had was you had to show proof of all test criteria. So like your test runs, code coverage, all that sort of stuff. We just automated it with Azure DevOps and dumped it into a spot. And we're like, hey, we're not going to give this to you every time, but it's generated every single time we deploy, which is one of the requirements. Like, you can go grab it literally whenever you want. Yeah. And that was just so much more efficient and empowering, because typically they'd have to send an email. An engineer on the team would then have to go generate it and grab it for each release. And it's just like, no, it's there and you can grab it. And they were even more efficient because they weren't waiting on us. Even though that process itself wasn't inherently super efficient, I think there has to be AI agents or something out there to try to automate the SOC process today. I'm not aware of any off the top of my head, but just like the massive amount of data you have to aggregate and put together, which is for the most part pretty, like, you're grabbing the same amount of data from the same spot or similar, of like, to your point, like access controls. The product owner was the person that approved this PR, right? Or approved this move to prod. Yeah. Yep, here's the proof and the backup of that. Every work item or every promotion to prod is tied to at least one work item. So we know like why stuff is moved. Like those kind of more tedious things. You can't tell me that people aren't building out copilots, or it's on somebody's mind somewhere, I'm sure, of like, hey, here you go, just hit a button, and now all of your Jira or Azure DevOps, or, you know, put your connectors in, and now we have a rough outline of that. And to your point, then the product owner goes back to doing what they're doing, or at this company, it was like the head of QA. They can go and worry about like, how do we actually prove that QA is helping increase quality, helping decrease bug and defects in production, instead of gathering data for a report. Like, I think that's super huge and empowering, kind of like moving back to what they're actually there for, not just, hey, you're here and maybe have some capacity. Go do a report for us.
Yeah, and I think it's DevOps started this, I think, a lot, which is like, I think it starts to change like how people view what they're actually providing value to the org for. So like, you know, like, and I came from the tech services background, right? Like the infrastructure side, and like on the operations side, like they're very focused on like, how do I keep these servers alive? They don't care about the applications. Like they're like, how do I make sure that all the apps are fine? Because if you break your app with your code, like that's not my thing, right? Like, and so they're like, a lot of these roles have been siloed off in the past, and now we're kind of like shifting that, right? Where we're making things, operations are changing. They're either becoming easier, or the way we handle things are different. And so now they can be more in tune with like, what's the value that we actually bring to this business? Like the value isn't that you're capable of following the Word doc and doing steps 1 through 10. I can pay an admin to do that. Like you're an engineer that has the capability to, you know, solve complex problems. And so now we're just like, how do we use that skill set with the dev teams to solve complex problems for the business, instead of you just focusing on keeping these things alive? And so I think all this AI is going to enhance that and like take some of these, like you said, more of these tedious tasks away. And then people are going to realize that they didn't need those to have a job. They just now have the ability to provide more value than they could before, potentially directly in line with the business needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where I hear the saying, like, AI is not going to replace people. People using AI are going to replace people, because you're going to get to that point of there's going to be a cliff, or a exponential growth of the person using AI is now X% more productive, 50, 100, whatever percentage. And you get to the point of, hey, if you are absolutely refusing to use it, it'd be like somebody back in the day, in my opinion, saying like, I'm not going to learn anything other than COBOL or like Fortran or VB. Like,
right.
Yeah. Could you still have a job?
Earlier today, you could still have a job doing COBOL. Yes.
Do you limit yourself on flexibility and like upward trajectory and all the other things? Also, yes. But I mean, I just even saw, let me double check if I find the link real quick, of even just how people are looking at upgrading different legacy code to just newer versions of things. They're trying to look at, how do I go from like .NET framework to a .NET, modern application.
There's AI products that people have built that help do that now too.
Yeah, I was.
So while you're looking for that real quick, there was a tweet by a guy that I know, and he protects his tweets, so I won't say his name, but essentially he said something to the effect of, if you're not using Copilot or something similar at this point as a software developer, you're actually committing malpractice.
Wow, yeah.
Because, I mean the amount of time you're billing is like exponentially more if you're not using the tools available to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like when I hear things like that too, because I'd say like seven years ago, there was like one of the big security conferences, they flat out said at a security conference, big one, that they were like, VMs are legacy at this point. Like, this is like 7 years ago. I mean, you still see like obviously a ton of people using VMs and stuff in the market. Like, it's just really intriguing to me. Like, that kind of hits home for people. We're moving away from this. So if like your entire brand and skill set is on this, like, this is not like new. Like, we're not blinding you. It's like here in front of you. Like, use these tools.
I did find the links. What it was is, so GitHub Team Workspace has a feature where you can write backlog items, and GitHub does like a Copilot to try to like give you the AC, kind of guide you on what exactly you need to do. And then it takes its best guess stab at solving like basically whatever feature you ask it for. There is now an early wait list and this is all publicly available, so I'll share the link. But there is a private preview for GitHub Copilot Upgrade Assistant for .NET. So when I first demoed this, I was like, somebody came up to me and was like, well, like what happens if you say like in a .NET legacy project, upgrade this to .NET Modern? And I was like, I haven't, or Angular JS to like Angular Modern. Like I haven't seen or heard of anybody doing that, but it's probably something it could help with. Well, now it looks like there's a specific private preview just for that for .NET. Your .NET framework application, there is now a private preview you can apply to be in that can, I would assume theoretically, try to move your legacy code to .NET Modern. But I think that's kind of the way we're going, right? Is if you're saying, hey, I'm going to be on COBOL forever, I'm going to be the .NET framework guy, like it's going to be easier and easier to get to modern stuff. And I think the biggest thing people don't move off COBOL is they don't want to accidentally introduce or break something that already works. I think we had Brian Griffin last week talk about...
Brian Griffin, really?
Oh my God. It's been a day, dude. Sorry, Kevin Griffin. Talk about how brownfield is his favorite type of app development because you have to work so long in a greenfield. And if something's been around long enough, you don't always remember, have the best documentation of all the fixes, all the random things you put in there. AI theoretically could help with that, though, of, hey, I need a one-to-one transfer, make sure all the same holes are patched, all that sort of stuff. I think just saying, I'm not going to learn anything new ever again, I don't think is going to work out well for people long term.
Yeah, it depends on if you're going to retire in the next 5 years or so. At that point, it's a different story, right? But
Yeah.
if you're 20 years old, you probably don't have a choice at this point.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of major shifts. You know, like you said, a lot of people are wondering, is this going to replace my job? But I think there's still a developer shortage in the nation. Like, and obviously we do a lot of outsourcing and stuff like that. And obviously we're constantly bringing in people from other countries, the H-1Bs. Like, there's a constant need for devs. And I think that what you're going to see, especially if you look at even the birth rates under 2.0 for the US, so like we're going to have like more jobs, but a reduction in workforce over time. AI is also going to help us scale. You could have one developer, like one tech lead, quote unquote, like strong developer, and then an army of potentially agents that person has on their team. And you could take all your 10 developers and now make 10 teams. Like as an example, like that could be the future reality that we live in is, you know, we have the same number of headcount, but now we can just do more with it because we can scale it out, you know, more efficiently than we could before. So I think we'll see a lot more of that than just straight up eliminations of positions. Like there could be niche exceptions in the market, right? The market always changes. But I think in the IT roles, I think it'd be more about scaling people out.
So you see that more like I'm a developer today, but tomorrow I'm going to be like a manager, except for it's a manager of agents. So thereby I'm still kind of a developer and a manager without the people problems.
Yeah. That's what I think. I think we'll start to see more of that. Like, I think it'll walk its way there. Like, I think we might end up seeing, you know, like a traditional like agile team, but then they start adding like 2 to 3 Copilot agents to help do code. You know, like that might be the starting point. And then I think that'll just start to grow out, and you'll still have all these people, but we can now scale that team out bigger with the same number of people, and maybe have multiple teams with the same number of people that we could before. That's what I think will happen. Obviously, we'll have to see how that plays out. But you know, there was that whole like controversy around Devin AI, where like they were like putting out fake videos or whatever. But Microsoft invested in Devin, so you know that's probably going to become a real thing at some point, because if Microsoft's investing real capital towards it, I think that they think that there's a reality there.
I think the other thing that we see today too is like you have product teams that sometimes are supporting individual applications or individual things, and you know it's somebody's baby their entire career, and then they go to retire and it's just like some monolithic thing that has just been like, you know, maybe it's 25% of your effort to do this one thing. That handoff can be pretty rough when you start bringing on a new person. That person quits, retires, moves on. Some companies do that because they have these smaller little things. I think you just see that maybe on steroids, or lack of a better term, because then they're able to scale. You can have AI write the documentation in such a way that other AI could just pick it up and run with it. It could explain it to you as a developer if you need to go in and make tweaks and, go hunt and squash a bug, that you're not, okay, well, give me 2 weeks to even stand the thing up, and then like I'll hopefully put a bug fix in, and hopefully it's tested so I don't bring down the entire tower when I, shove a new piece of code in or take a piece out. All those kind of things I think start to go away. And then you might have teams that they're still product teams, but maybe they're starting to get more towards the business vertical, or maybe they're handling more bigger applications or more smaller applications, instead of where sometimes people are trying to go, hey, the 2 pizza rule team, right? Of you shouldn't have more developers and a team bigger than 2 pizzas because they say it's too big, too much communication. Like you lose the agility to a certain extent. I'm wondering if that then your ideal team maybe gets smaller, or if you get closer to that one-to-one relationship even with a developer and a product person, because it's like, okay, this product person, or maybe it's a one-to-many instead of, today we have many developers for one product person because you're hamstrung by how fast people can write code. You could potentially get to the point where maybe you can have multiple PMs feeding a developer, or to like what you said, Chris, of the end state of maybe one developer is just dictating all these things to agents, and the PM then takes a higher level up of more strategic visioning, strategic planning, instead of, hey, we need a button on page 25 that does the XYZ action.
Yeah.
Well, they're never going to give up that job. That's their favorite thing to do. Come back to you and say, you put the button in the wrong place, or it's the wrong color, or it's too big.
Well, I even think of like the UI UX dings you get, right? Like to your point of, hey, you're coloring slightly off. Hey, this isn't quite up with our margins or our company flexbox. AI could just notice that and fix it for you, right? So like those kind of things going back and forth could potentially go away. So UI UX again, or the PMs can say, hey, like look of feel, you could have an AI agent that looks at accessibility. So you never have to hear, hey, you forgot an area label again.
Like, so you just solved all conflicts between developers and PMs for all time with your statement.
Well, and that's the future we could get to, right? Of AI agents are helping with that, because then you're not, the code itself you're writing, I think that's the first thing we'll kind of see, right? Is checkers get more and more implemented for reviewing code, not necessarily maybe slinging it. We do have code agents that can sling code today. I think Kevin told us about, he was doing different things and it's gotten better, or there's certain things he gets frustrated with. I think boilerplate and test case writing right now is pretty solid use cases for AI from what I've seen, especially in JavaScript or TypeScript. You can just give them functions and say, hey, I use jest. So like when I write my it statement, very regularly auto completes, I'd say to like 90% accuracy of the actual test content that I'm looking for, given it just by, I set up the scenario by typing it out. I don't think it's crazy to think that those AI agents are going to start being your linter for you potentially. Helping you write test cases, maybe pointing out things that you didn't expect of, hey, maybe here's a branch that you don't have any logic around that'll throw an exception. Those kind of things. I don't think we're going to be, I'd say we're probably months or years off of that, not decades at this point.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I think the interesting thing with AI, right? AI is in like a very interesting spot because a lot of companies are very focused on because it's a lot of it's being led by technology specialists, but a lot of AI problems that people are looking at is like on the technology side of how do I solve tech problems with AI, but there's also the whole business problem side of like the AI, like how do I do risk detection or fraud detection or maybe underwriting, but then there's legalities you're playing in this, like Colorado, I think just banned AI from doing underwriting for unless it like meets certain criteria or something like that, because obviously you're like denying people of, certain things. And so there's legalities and stuff that are all playing in with some of these things too, which is kind of interesting with the AI space. So I think this whole AI landscape is going to mold drastically a few times over the, next 3 to 5 years. I think you're going to see big changes from policies in the government to how it gets used in businesses. I mean, there's already sole businesses that come up with like doing, travel planning with AI. You're seeing that already spin up. There's YouTube content that's solely created with AI characters, AI people. Like none of those are real. Like complete YouTube channels on that. It's just really interesting. Like the entertainment space obviously is going to be very different in the next 5 years. So not even just technology stuff. I mean, AI is just like disrupting end to end, changing the landscape quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think the core takeaway I have, or at least the way I look at it, you can be try to pessimistic, but I think the optimistic viewpoint is it gets you to be able to do the thing you want more or at a higher scalability. I think we had a previous guest on, we talked about like voice actors. Could you imagine if you just like record your voice and somebody likes it so much they can just pay you a royalty and they can type pretty much whatever you want? Like maybe there's regulations or maybe there's system stuff to block them from saying everything, but then I'm now a voice actor making money off my voice and I'm not doing any work after, I've trained a model.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that do they have to pay royalties if it's just a sample they used that you agreed to let them record? Because I just got an offer yesterday to apply for this thing where you can make $50 an hour, basically voice training AI. And it's specifically for people who have been in music or in theater and like have some sort of like inflection and tone in their voice to help the AI get better at like actually sounding like a human. It's a really interesting thing, but yeah, if I take that job, first I'd have to apply for it and then get accepted or whatever. They could record my voice, and then would they have to pay me royalties? Probably not, since I agreed to the $50 an hour, and now they could make unlimited content with my voice or a similar voice and be like, yeah, wouldn't that be interesting?
Well, to make it even darker, is
no,
it's gonna. I'll say that I had this business idea like with a couple of friends like 10 years ago, and it's awkward, but it's going to be a reality now, which is like you will literally be able to talk to like dead friends and relatives.
Yes.
Like that's a thing.
Yeah, and if you get enough of their like literally machine learning of their personality, you could actually have something that sounds like them and potentially responds to a new situation the way they actually would have.
Yep, exactly.
Someone who has already gone from this earth.
Yes.
And hereby a form of digital immortality arises.
Yep. Like you could always just go ask like your parents for advice. Like,
yeah,
it's just going to be a way different world in the future. And then same thing if you want to talk to your favorite celebrity, like that's available.
Well, wasn't it? I think Meta paid one of the Jenners or Kardashians to be like an AI agent for them, and like they recorded her voice and her body and like her face, so like you could talk to it and it would converse with you, and it was super weird. I think they eventually shut it down, but like yeah, a celebrity could make money off their voice and likeness, and it had a different name, but it was very obviously one of them. There was other celebrities too that they did, but yeah, like here's my friend Chris Thompson. We just got enough content. I'm just going to talk to you and get advice from you. And like, we don't converse, but I could have an AI agent that could be you theoretically in the future. And that'd be so weird.
Sell that as a consulting model. Like I don't have to go do the consulting. I just sell my agent so they can ask questions, get answers.
Just reply with it depends.
You guys, I don't know about you guys, but I have the best consultant ever. I ask a question and literally within a minute, I've got a response. I don't know how he's online all the time. It's amazing.
He replies first with it depends all the time, and that's really weird. But if I say to elaborate more.
Never make the declarative statement ever. It's just, I think it'll be like this. Just depends.
Yeah.
And then on your end, you're using a co-pilot to summarize all the questions you got yesterday or overnight.
You know how the kids actually come to you and get you on the phone.
They call you up, or if you show up into the office the next day, they're like, hey, thanks for the advice last night. You're not like, yeah, glad you liked it.
Anytime.
Anytime.
Welcome.
Yeah.
It'd be, yeah. Oh, that's hilarious.
Especially
maybe they get
remote, right? I could have my face and everything talking to them on Teams. Doesn't have to be impersonal.
Or just do like that one guy who went to the football game with the green screen behind him.
Yeah.
Time, so he was like at the football game, but he's actually in his Teams meeting or whatever.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
I don't know if that was real or somebody staged it, but it was still a good idea.
That guy, I think, has a bunch of TikToks, and he'd goof about like all the things he would do during his work meetings. And like he'd be like fishing and drinking beers on one of them. but like he'd have his green screen background so it looked like he was in an office. That was a great. I think the other thing that's really funny is Scott Hanselman shared a short clip of people basically reinvented dial-up. So they had two AI agents that basically were able to identify they were both AI agents, and they spoke over dial-up tones because it was quicker than actually talking.
Yeah, it was gibberish or something. It's Google that did it.
Yeah.
Google Gibberlink or something. It's like, I'm an AI agent. Oh, how convenient. I'm also an AI agent. Would you like to switch to Gibberlink communication? Why, yes.
Yeah, it's basically just dial-up.
Yeah.
It's like beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's scary because as soon as the sentient AI realizes that they can talk to each other in a way that we can't keep up, we're done.
That's true. That's true.
Skylink.
Yeah. Terminator's definitely halfway there.
Well, did you see yesterday? I saw yesterday said they've now invented metal that actually does what the Terminator did in Terminator 2. It can like reshape itself.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah. So we are on the way. We've
Yeah.
got AI and metal that is malleable.
We need to put that in cars. Imagine like if fender benders just like weren't a thing anymore because your bumper just like popped itself back out.
That would be hilarious.
Oh, God.
Dad gets a call. Yeah, I got in a wreck today. Oh, so okay. Go home. Got in a wreck? No, Dad, I didn't get in a wreck. Look, the car's fine.
Man.
Let's imagine insurance premiums dropping, like things like that. Because it's like, oh yeah,
come on. No way. No way. They'll be like, well, that bumper actually costs twice as much to replace when it actually breaks. So now your insurance rates are going up, even though we're doing way less. The AI underwriter, I'm just kidding.
Yes. The AI underwriter that is quoting me my prices.
So I think, Chris, we talked about too, you were a director for a little bit before you went back to actually practitioning. How has that kind of changed, and how did you, I coined a term with Brian, those who can't do teach and those who can't teach manage. I don't know if that's real or not. Somebody might have said it before. But I'm kind of curious, how did you go from managing people and potentially teaching to back to doing? Was that like a hard transition for you, or was it just you're keeping busy on the side? So
Yeah. So good question. Yeah, and I was before I left, I was actually moving into potentially I was offered to move into an even higher leadership role there, but the transition is strange. Like, and I have a different outlook probably on like management at companies. I very much like the flat org model, and that was something that Deliveron actually I learned from Deliveron early, like the pre-acquisition. And you see a few large companies that do the flat org model. Tesla's one of them. I don't know if you've ever seen Joe Justice's YouTube videos, but he's like an Agile Munich, and he implemented Agile at Tesla factories, which is really interesting. But they're completely flat org. And so I like that model. So I'll preface that first, that I don't like a lot of layers, right? Like up and down as possible. And so I think it just depends on like your outlook of like what those leadership roles should do. And so when I learned is like, especially when we went through an acquisition and there's a completely different style of leadership and management that, is different than what I was used to. I realized that like, I just look at myself as these are the capabilities that I'm supposed to work on, director role. Like, these are the things. Like, I'm not looking at it as like, oh, I just manage people. Like, I look at it as like, my goal is, one of the things I have to do is help with growth plans for these people. But I also have to help with these sales activities. And I also have to do this and I have to do that. And like, these are the things that I deliver, like in my role. Instead of like, oh, I just manage people. And like, that's kind of fluffy and like has a bunch of different meanings depending on where you work at, right? Like, and so I already had kind of this mentality, but I was coming out of the tech stuff. And Azure changes so quickly that like I felt the grip I had. Like I felt like I had a really strong grip when I was a consultant, like previously. And I just quickly felt that grip on Azure like dissipating out of my hands like fast. And so I had to figure out like what do I need to know, like stay up to date on? Like what can I stay up to date on? And so I just tried to go from like the hands-on keyboard engineering details to architectural, and then also like conceptually, like what are the concepts, like the modern concepts that I need to make sure I'm staying in tune with. So even when I was in a director role, like I was always trying to stay in tune with modern concepts, high-level architectural pieces, but I don't know the details, but at least I understood those concepts and where we were going and why we were doing those things. And so when I went back to starting my own thing and starting my own company, to your point, I had to get back down into the engineering side. And I spent a lot of personal time re-ramping back up because like when I was doing stuff, it was still ARM templates. And now we're doing Bicep or we're looking at Terraform or like new things. They're similar enough. So like you can bridge the gap, but like relearn all the gaps I had in Azure, which was quite significant. Like when you get into the portal, like I'm just like overwhelmed by all the new things that I didn't even know existed even though I tried my best to stay up to date with high level things. Like there was a lot of new stuff. And so I was spending evenings for weeks just literally I bought myself a Visual Studio license and I was like out just writing Bicep in my free time, like writing Terraform. I was looking at building new services in Azure. Like I was reacclimating back to that because the one thing I didn't want to do going into my first like big engagement as my new company is I didn't want to like be completely uneducated. Like, like I fake it going in. Like quality is obviously in the name of the company. So I wanted to make sure like I was going to be high quality delivery. So I spent a lot of free time going back and like building things in my free time to get reacclimated with hands-on keyboard. And I'd say even for the first like 3 to 6 months in my engagement, I was still acclimating to new like things. I was like, oh, I remember how this did this before, but now I got to go make sure it still works this way. So like I was like, I'm constantly like bridging that gap again. But in Azure, you kind of do that anyway, right? Like every time I go to a new client, I'm like, I did this way before, but there's probably a new thing, so we should just relook at it anyway. So now it's just the model. Like I think that's just the model of consulting now. You're not paying a consultant that's done the same thing 100 times because that might look different today than it did yesterday. So like now you need the consultant that's done those things, but also can quickly figure out the new things and how the new way to do it is. And I think that helped me get back up to speed because that's just the expectation, in my opinion, nowadays.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that wasn't a dig at Brian or teachers or even managers. There's great managers and all those things are needed. But I agree wholeheartedly, like even client to client, sometimes even division to division in a company, they can do things so drastically differently that, to your point, you might have Alec who's done, maybe a box arrow cylinder, simple web application, right? You got your front end, back end database. And they might do it one way, and then you go to a different company or even different part of the client, and hey, instead of .NET on an app service, we use Azure Functions, and instead of Entra, we use OAuth, and they're bringing you in to be kind of a generalist a little bit. And if you just say, hey, I only know how to do ARM templates, I only know how to do app service, I only know how to do at that point, they're not going to probably be super happy. And even if they do all the things in the same way you do, their process might be entirely different. So even though you have the core technology, like you have to be flexible. And I think that's kind of comes with the territory of consulting. You brought up like not liking to do the same thing every day. I think that's one of the fun things of consulting is a new client or even a different team on the same client can be a totally different way to do stuff. And reacclimating is part of the fun.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before, but I think one of the things that you see in the workforce is a lot of people are they focus a lot on like copy pasting things that they've seen before. So like they've seen companies do this process before, so they think that they need to do it here. Or they've seen companies use this tool over here and that works great over there, so we should use that tool over at this company. And to your point, like there could be nuanced reasons as to why that's useful over there and not useful over here. And I think one thing that I think would help a lot of people is like just always looking at it from like a problem solving perspective. Like,
yes,
you know what I mean? Like there's a problem to be solved here. And yes, we've seen solutions in the past, and that doesn't mean we ignore them, but we should have a really good understanding of like, what are we trying to solve here? And why is that? And why did this maybe work over here? Is that too much or too little here? And just always thinking about these things as like problems to be solved and not necessarily like just because you saw it work somewhere else doesn't mean it's going to be the right thing here. And I think that mindset is very difficult for a lot of people. Like they fall into well, I don't need to learn that because I already know the answer because we did it this way. And it's like, but why did they do it that way? Like that's maybe not the same problem we're solving here. And so
because it's just how we do it here.
exactly. I mean, those are the 7 most expensive words is like, that's the way we've always done it. So, people really fall into that trap because they're not looking at it like a new problem to solve or a problem that can be solved differently. It's just, they just know they've seen it this way and that's the answer.
I think that's a great point kind of to leave off on and maybe ponder. Chris, is there any last minute plugs, or if anybody wants to follow along with your journey, how can they keep up with you?
Yeah. So we have a website for OptQuality.com, OptQuality.com. If you want to get in contact, that's a good way. Also on LinkedIn, you can reach out on LinkedIn for Chris Thompson.
Well, thanks for taking time to chat with us, Chris. Thanks, Brian, for being around as always. With that, we'll see everybody again next week.
Yeah,
Great week.
Bye, everybody.